So I know what you're all thinking, not another Loudness War level comparison video, but there's a specific reason for this one. Most people agree that the Loudness Wars are a bad thing, and that music that has been very crushed doesn't sound as good as music that's been given a little bit more room to breathe. But not everybody, and in fact I have often heard it argued that certain styles of music, for example heavy rock, need that very dense, squashed, compressed sound that currently they all seem to have. And for some reason, it's Green Day who are often used as the example of this. I don't know where that anecdote comes from, but this video is basically to show that that's not true. Even Green Day sounds better with more dynamics. And the reason this has come up is that recently I saw a post on the End the Loudness War Facebook group from a guy called Michael, posting this picture here showing the difference between the original CD release of American Idiot by Green Day and a new version of it that's become available on hdtracks.com. Now, the main reason for HD Tracks is actually to offer uncompressed 2496 downloads of as much music as possible. And if you've read my blog or watched some of my other videos, you'll know I'm quite skeptical about the benefits for most of us of 2496 versus 16-bit 44.1 audio, but I certainly think there is a benefit to having uncompressed audio, and this master is a little bit different because it actually has more dynamic range. It's a remaster by Ted Jensen, which is a name that will be familiar to anybody who's been following the story of the Loudness Wars. It was done 100% analog, I understand, and has just been released. So I was really interested in hearing how this sounded, and I thought I'd show you what I found out. So here are the two versions. No prizes for guessing which is which. We have the 2012 remaster down the bottom here, and we have the original CD release up at the top. And if you zoom in on the waveforms, it's quite easy to see how that loudness has been achieved. The original CD release was clipped fairly heavily, and you can see there's none of that on the reissue, which seems like a good start. They're obviously very different in level, so the first thing you need to do to make a fair comparison is to adjust them. And what I usually do is listen to the loudest section of the song to do this. So let's have a quick listen. This is the HD Tracks version. So that's kind of an RMS level of about -10. Let's compare that with the CD. So that's got an RMS of more like -6, so that's about 4 dBs difference. So let's try turning the CD down by 4 dBs to get a fairer comparison. And take a listen. Incidentally, in case anybody decides that maybe the things that I'm showing in this video are down to the 2496 format of the HD Tracks version, I've actually converted it down to 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz. So this is a fair comparison between these two. So let's flick between the two using the solo button and see what we hear. CD version still sounds fractionally louder to me. I'm going to turn that down. Let's try -4.5. I think you'll agree they're fairly well matched in level now. And probably the first interesting thing to say is the difference is not huge. Depending on how sensitive you are to this stuff, you may be listening to those, and I mean, you can hear the slight skip when I move from listening to one version to the other, but you may not think that's a massive difference. And I guess I might agree with you. So one interesting thing is that even though this CD version up the top here has been quite heavily clipped and is 5 dBs maybe louder than the 2012 reissue, there's not an enormous change in the sound. Let's listen to one of the other sections of the song, quieter section, just to see how that compares.
I walk a lonely road, the only one that I have ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me and I walk alone.
Now that same section from the remaster, the HD Tracks version.
I walk a lonely road, the only one that I have ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me and I walk alone.
Now there I can hear a difference. Listen to the drums, basically. Listen to the snare sound as I flick between those two different versions. So we'll start with the HD Tracks version.
I've ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me and I walk alone. I walk this empty street on the boulevard of broken dreams, where the city sleeps.
Now there you can hear quite a big difference, and it's an interesting difference because to me the CD version now sounds slightly louder. Even though we balance the levels up at the end here, when we go to this quieter section the CD sounds louder, and we would expect that because this has been pushed up harder towards the 0 dB limit at the top of the digital scale. So the loud sections have been reduced in volume and the quieter sections are increased. That it has less dynamic range, it has less dynamics. But then the question comes, what's a fair comparison between those two? Should you balance the loudest sections and compare them, or the quieter sections? If we've got the loudest sections sounding quite similar, maybe it's okay that the quieter sections sounds a bit louder. Maybe that's the point. That might have been true in the past. Personally, I would argue that the open, punchy quality to the snare in that section there on the more dynamic version was well worth trading half a dB of level for. But of course, now we have the new broadcast regulations for loudness coming into play. They're law in America, they're being adopted here in Europe, and I predict they're going to move on to be used in consumer devices like iPods and other MP3 players in the near future. So what I did is I measured the loudnesses of these two songs using the new R128 standard that's been adopted here in Europe, which assigns an overall loudness to each song. And the numbers it came up with specify that according to this new method of measuring the songs, there is a 5.2 dB difference in loudness between the two songs. So if these two versions were played side by side on the radio, this louder one would be turned down by 5.2 dBs to fit the loudness requirements for broadcast. So now let's compare those two with that adjustment. This is the CD version. You can hear and see the difference on the meters there very clearly. The CD version, when the levels are balanced in that way, sounds quieter than the more dynamic version, and to me it suffers in comparison. I want to just show you that difference using one other method, which is a new loudness meter that's become available called LCast, made by Meter Plugs. And it's very similar in terms of the information it gives you to the new gen Viz LM meter that I've used in previous videos. But the nice thing is, as you can see, I can zoom in and out and tweak the scale of the loudness range. And what I want to show you is the change in loudness in one of the sections of the song on this meter, so you can see how the R128 standard measures these two songs. So first we'll do the CD version, and I'm going to zoom in as the meter allows me to get plenty of resolution.
Somewhere in my mind, on the borderline of the edge, and where I walk alone.
Now let's try the same section, listening to the HD Tracks more dynamic version.
Sometimes I wish someone up there will find me.
And you can see that immediately. The HD Tracks version has at least half a dB, if not 3/4 of a dB more loudness in the louder sections. These quiet sections are very similar in level when the two are balanced in this way. And that's a visual and technical confirmation, if you like, of what we just heard and saw maybe a little bit less precisely on the TT Dynamic Range Meter. The more dynamic version has more loudness range to play with. It has more impact in the louder sections, and even if you don't hear a huge difference between those two, I think you would agree that the CD version of that track doesn't sound any better. They sound very similar. When you listen for longer periods of time, and you may not be able to pick this out on YouTube, you really start to notice the distortion and the lack of impact in the snare on that original CD release. I think that's a real shame. It achieves nothing, especially in future as this loudness standardization becomes more widespread. And I think it certainly proves the point that heavy rock music like Green Day doesn't need, in inverted commas, a super compressed, super limited, super dense sound. It sounds fantastic, and you can probably imagine I'm delighted by this. This is exactly the kind of remaster that I was hoping for as a result of initiatives like HD Tracks and Mastered for iTunes. Whether or not you agree that the 2496 format offers any audible benefits, there's no question that more dynamic masters can sound better than less dynamic versions. Examples like Jack White's Blunderbuss with a dynamic range of 10 dBs getting to #1 in the Billboard charts prove that, and I just hope we see more releases like this in the future. My name is Ian Shepherd. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching. There's loads more discussion about issues like this on my website, productionadvice.co.uk. Please head over and check it out.